everybody. Welcome to Post Games, a podcast about how and why we love video games. My name is Chris Plant. As always, this episode will be about video games, but I want to start with a movie. In a few weeks, my most anticipated movie of the summer, if I'm being really honest with myself, hits theaters. It's The Naked Gun, directed by Akiva Schaffer of The Lonely Island and starring Liam Neeson. The movie reboots the iconic slapstick comedy series from my childhood. Now, it's totally possible you've never seen any of the Naked Gun films, whether that be on VHS or DVD or just a YouTube clip. So here's a taste.
He's Lieutenant Frank Drebin.
Whatever scum did this, not one man on this force will rest for 1 minute until he's behind bars. Now let's grab a bite to eat.
He's a good cop who's having a bad day. His best friend
Everyone should have a friend like you.
is in a coma.
As soon as Nordberg is better, he's welcome back at Police Squad. But I wouldn't wait until the last minute to fill out those organ donor cards.
Safe to say, they don't make a lot of goofy comedies like this anymore. According to the Wall Street Journal reporter Ben Fritz, at a recent Naked Gun screening at Paramount, producer Seth MacFarlane, yes, the creator of Family Guy, explained to the audience that a comedy is a type of movie you are allowed and even encouraged to laugh at in a theater. He said he understood that we might not remember. Alongside rebooting the Naked Gun series, people around Hollywood hope this film's success could repopularize comedies in general. Now, while I was producing this week's episode, I kept thinking about this. The strange way that comedy has shifted from the pop culture of previous generations, think film, TV, music, into the pop culture of modern young people. Memes, reels, TikToks, YouTube videos, anything short and shareable. And I began to wonder if that's why video games, for the first time in their existence, feel consistently funny. When you flip through TikTok or YouTube, you will inevitably see hilarious clips of streamers being gobbled up by monsters in Repo, or you'll see bugs in AAA games where a once lifelike protagonist dissolves into a pair of floating eyeballs and a wig. I've long wondered why so few games are intentionally funny. Why is it so hard for developers to make a comedy video game? And despite that, how are video games so good at making us laugh? To get answers, I spoke with two people who have experience making people laugh inside and outside of games professionally. This week on Post Games, how to make video games funny. A prologue for Patreon subscribers. Before writing hit late-night comedy shows, Mike Drucker worked at Nintendo's exclusive storytelling group. He stopped by the show to share what it's like to write jokes for Nintendo's famous characters and its most intimidating directors. Act 1. Earlier this year, Drucker released a memoir about growing up with video games. He shares how he made video games funny without making fun of video games and the people who love them. Act 2. How do you make a video game funny? Tom Francis, the writer of 2024's Funniest Game, shares his list of reliable tricks. Act 3, the news of the week. Donkey Kong Bonanza is here. I'll let you know what people are saying. Also, the wildest industry story of the summer. People are getting sued. It is messy out there. And a special bonus for all listeners. An excerpt from Drucker's book, Good Game No Rematch, in which Mike, as a high schooler in the era of Columbine, nearly got expelled for being part of a group that bonded over StarCraft at the computer lab. It's a funny story, and also a sad one, kind of my favorite type. It is a stacked episode this week. Let's get to it. It is a new year and you want to eat better, but you still have no time to work with. You have no energy. You have so much going on in your life. What do? You do Factor. 2 minutes, real food, and you are done. You're not failing at eating healthy. You're failing at having 3 extra hours in every night. You're failing at not being a chef and wanting to do cleanup. Factor takes care of that. It has delicious food that is good for you. You got lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole food ingredients, and none of the yucky stuff, no refined sugars, no artificial sweeteners. It will offer you whatever you need to match your lifestyle. For me, Mediterranean diet, it really works well. But maybe you need something else, like a high-protein diet or GLP-1 support or ready-to-eat salads. Whatever it is, Factor wants to meet you on your page. Always fresh, never frozen, and like I said, ready in 2 minutes with no prep, no cleanup, just chill. I use Factor. I think that you should too. Head to factormeals.com/postgames, 50 off, and use code postgames50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box, plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscriptions purchase. Make healthier eating easy with Factor. Mike Drucker is a stand-up comic, author, and critic. He's written on Nintendo games, including naming a fan-favorite Zelda character. He co-created IGN's Up at Noon with Greg Miller and other talented folks years before Kinda Funny. And he has written on late-night comedy shows like Jimmy Fallon and Samantha Bee. He's received 8 Emmy nominations and won the Writers Guild of America Award for Best Comedy Variety. And I'm sure he would just be furious that I listed all of that off. I have had the good fortune of living a life that intersects with Drucker. We were buddies on Twitter in the very early days, trading goose about video games. When Polygon moved into an office in Midtown near 30 Rock, we'd sometimes meet for board games. He would be exceedingly patient as I tried to make heads or tails of the rules. I never really did. I share all of this, somewhat to brag because I like to be associated with really nice, cool people, but also to vouch for Mike's new book, Good Game, No Rematch. This is a beautiful memoir that collects a couple dozen episodes from Drucker's life from childhood to today. It is unapologetically nerdy, self-admittedly cringe-inducing at times, and aspirationally vulnerable. And it is funny, like very funny. You'll get a chance at the end of the show to hear a chapter that I really enjoyed. But before that, we'll start with a quick split. Patreon subscribers, Mike was kind enough to dig into the really nitty-gritty video game stuff, like what it is like to work at Nintendo HQ, why you should never play basketball with Reggie Fils-Aimé, and the challenges of writing comedy for video game fans versus a general audience. For everybody else, don't worry, plenty of great stuff. We'll go straight to Act 1, where Mike talks about turning a life of video game fandom into a comedic memoir. This is the only Laugh Out Loud book that features an entire chapter about nearly winning a game of NFL 2K, a genuinely tear-jerking story about Nier in the pandemic, and a lengthy description of the worst Super Mario costume ever made. How this man made a mustache will haunt me. So, without further ado, Mike Drucker. Act 1. The Funny Life of a 90s Gamer. Okay, let's dive into the book. Good Game, No Rematch. Out now in the stores. People can buy it wherever they like. Independent bookstores. I recommend the audiobook version. You do the performance. It is excellent.
Thank you.
The book reminded me of the classic memoirs in which an iconic athlete reflects on the simpler days of their childhood.
Yeah.
Except in the place of like winning the local Little League playoffs or like breaking an arm in backyard football, they recount the time they waited in line to play 3 minutes of the Nintendo 64.
Exactly so.
It's incredible how similar they are. What books or authors did you have rolling around your brain while you were conceiving the book?
I was definitely reading Silver Screen Fiend by Patton Oswalt, which sort of has a similar through line with movies. I was reading, the author escapes my name, but I was reading like a music, sort of like pop music thing that was sort of in a similar vein to that, where it was kind of like, you know, this is how pop music changed who I am as a person. And the athlete thing is also exactly right. Like, I really wanted this book to not just be a love letter to games, but also to be a description how video games made me who I am. So it's not just, here's something I've enjoyed, or here's something I'm nostalgic for, or what a time childhood was, but it's like, here's how it literally, brick by brick, for better or worse, made me who I am today.
I want to say up front, I adored this book, but I had like a real journey with it. And I think it was kind of a journey with a lot of judgment of myself and maybe residual judgment that our generation has, because I did have that kind of problem at first where I was like, this isn't barbarian days. We are not out on the waves of Hawaii learning these great lessons. And then as I kind of forgave myself, I was like, I learned all of these things. I mean, it was almost uncanny how much it felt like my childhood. And why would it be any different that you have these magical experiences where you lose or almost win, actually, in your case, a single game of NFL 2K? Why shouldn't that have as much importance as everything else? I'm curious if that is ever kind of a thing that you have had to wrestle with, or if you've always had kind of a confidence about your love in video games.
It's certainly been something I've had to wrestle with in terms of when I was in grad school for English literature, it's hard to find community with that. And sometimes you wonder if, like, oh man, I'm sitting with people in suits, in tweed suits, who are like getting their PhDs. I got my master's. I was not going to get my PhD. But like sitting with like grad students, and then I'd like go home and play. That was around like when BioShock first came out, and play BioShock and be like, am I the weirdo? Like, am I the one who's like, am I supposed to be like appreciating better art? I never got away from games because I don't think games would have ever let me get away from them. But there was definitely a point in college when I was like, am I just being a silly boy who's not a proper artist? And I was able to fortunately get away from that once I realized no one cares.
People can't see it right now, but you are wearing a Seinfeld-style hat that says Silent Hill, so it's very clear where history took us.
Yes.
You have so many funny observations of video game culture from a very young age in this book, like 3 or 4. And sometimes they feel like reflections from an adult's POV, but often they feel like memories that you're just sharing whole cloth. Like, these were observations that you were making as a child, and I guess have been honed into this book ever since. Yeah. Was there an audience that you had as a kid for these observations that you were sharing these with?
Sure. Like, I had, my little brother, Daniel, who plays a, pretty big part in the book, and a lot of my video game friends. Like, we were the ones who connected over them, so a lot of those moments we'd clown on each other for. A lot of the people I mentioned in the book, we played video games for hours in my high school, which had the advantage of getting funding for new computers, but not funding for enough teachers to teach them. So we had amazing, up-to-date Windows PCs, Unreal Tournament, Quake 3, and nobody to stop us. Those were my people. Those were my audience that heard those stories. Those were the people who were there when my brother kicked the Dreamcast before I could win NFL 2K. So that was my audience.
In the book, you regularly poke fun at yourself. I think you are maybe your biggest target. You very rarely, if ever, actually poke fun at video games. Why that dichotomy?
Even though I make fun of myself, I did not want the book to be about how video games themselves embarrassed me. I was more than fine to be with how my interpretation or my love of them embarrassed me. But I didn't want this to be somehow me having my cake and eating it too, where I can say, I love video games so much, but aren't they for dorks? Not really the way I wanted to take it. These are things I love. And, the closest I probably come to making fun of a game is the little interstitial section on Rapture, where it's just like a sales brochure for the place. That's the closest I come, and really that's me just saying that setting is ridiculous. It's not me saying, like, this is a bad game. I don't know. I love the games, and I wanted it to be a celebration of the games. And I kind of, over the decades of my life, have come to the realization a lot of my embarrassments and failures came from me. And so it was a little more fun to play that way.
I mean, I think you're being a little hard on yourself. Speaking of successes, in the book, you briefly mentioned the anxiety of working at Fallon, having to play FIFA with celebrities. And I remember this period, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but one day you actually stopped by the old Polygon offices after work to play some board games. And I remember you being so stressed. And it was not just that you had to play games with celebrities, but that you had to specifically play games with Fallon because you had become unwittingly his like multiplayer buddy. And I'm just so curious, what was it like to be the video game guy in that writer's room and have that expectation on you?
One, it's always useful in any writer's room to be the guy or the woman or the person who knows something. If you're on the crime show and someone knows everything about, like, traffic law, even if that sounds ridiculous, that person is useful. So on the bright side, like, even if someone else pitched a video game bit, I would get things like, hey, can we run this by Drucker to make sure if it, like, tracks? Or, like, when they had Reggie Fils-Aimé on the show, I would often help produce the segments because I both knew him and I knew Jimmy, and I kind of could translate what Nintendo corporate wanted and what the show wanted and be able to, like, synthesize those. So it was actually great. And one of the upsides with a small downside was, you know, Jimmy legitimately loves video games. I remember I went back there to work for like a year and a half, a couple years ago, and one of the first things he asked me was like, hey, who did you like romance in Persona 5? And I was like, I was not expecting this question. I didn't want to be like, well, the teacher, and I know he's a teen, but I'm an adult, so I felt weird no matter what I chose. Like, I didn't want to get into that, where I was like, am I a bad guy? Is he a bad guy? Is she a bad guy? You know, and he will invite you to play games. He's a massive Mario Kart fan. Always great. He's a massive Rocket League fan. Always great. But he's also a massive fan of, like, sports games that are more accurate simulations, like FIFA, or, you know, like Madden. And those I'm terrible at. I'm great at an arcade game. I'm great at NBA Jam, NFL Blitz. Any sports game that requires a thorough knowledge of both the sports and its, like, you know, little minutia rules, I am awful at. And so whenever I was placed on his team, I was always like, oh God, I'm going to do so bad. I'm going to embarrass myself in front of the boss. And, like, you'd be playing, and there would be, like, other important people playing, too. And you're like, I don't want to look bad in front of that person. So it wasn't, like, stressful, like, I'm going to get fired. It was more like if your boss asked you to do something really... If your boss, like, asked you to go bowling with them and you sucked at it, you're like, oh, I'm never going to get asked again.
Did you ever feel the need to practice FIFA outside of the work environment so that you could bring a really good game?
No, I think my biggest mistake was I never did that, or, like, I was invited to a Clash of Clans group with him, and I kind of did it, like, well for a while, and then I fell off, and I was always like, I should do better about, not just with my boss, but maintaining friendships in general.
Extremely relatable as a person over the age of 35. Okay, so you've been working in comedy for around 20 years. You've worked in media, you've worked in games, you've worked on late night shows, you've written this book. After all of that, what motivates you to wake up every day and to make people laugh?
Well, fear of not having enough money to retire. So I think that is good. You know, honestly, it's I don't know, because it's fun and enjoyable. It's something that I've trained myself to do, to write jokes and to have fun with it. That it's not like I wake up and I meditate and affirm how grateful I am, but I do get to, like, wake up and go, I'm going to check the news and write a joke. Or, you know, I'm going to get mad at a video game and write an article and get paid for it. And that's kind of a cool privilege to have. I think it's that I do feel like I'm lucky enough to be riding the carousel, so I want to take as much advantage of being on the carousel while I can.
Do you ever want to go back into making games?
I'd totally be down to go back to making games. Like, I'm still occasionally hired by companies to do punch-up, to do anything from, like, minor barks to script punch-up. So, like, I still have a foot in the industry, but definitely, like, if a project came around and it was like, hey, can you dedicate 2 years to writing something really funny? I absolutely would love that.
What is your most recent memory of a video game that made you laugh?
That's a great question. You know what? You know, other than Death Stranding 2 falling down off a mountain, which I always believe in myself a little bit too much. I believe that I don't need that ladder. I can make it. And then I whoo boy, fall off. Outside of that, I would say 2 Point Museum. It's just filled with so many good gags in it. So many like little things where if you read it, there's a joke in there that's super funny. It's one of those games where the more you pay attention to it, the funnier it gets, and I really respect that, because sometimes it's the reverse, where the more you pay attention, the more the jokes fall apart.
I mean, you mentioned Death Stranding 2, and you said this kind of early on, too, of games where maybe they aren't intentionally funny, but they just kind of inherently lead to humor. Do you find that those are the games that you're like more often laughing at?
I think so, but I think that's just because there's more of them. You know, like, there's more, or something like even Mario Kart. You know, like, if you're on a track and you get hit by a blue shell, then a red shell, then a red shell, then a green shell. Like, that makes me laugh because that is a ridiculous situation. You know, it's almost akin to seeing bloopers of a movie. It might have been a drama, but the bloopers are funny just because it's an unexpected failure in an unexpected moment. But, you know, there's also a difference between that and when I play games like Thank Goodness You're Here, which is, I consider that the best straight-up comedy game ever made. It's a very short game, so I'm not saying it has the most laughs of any game ever made because it's extremely short. But to me, that is the perfect synthesis of gameplay and comedy.
Why do you think that is?
I think because, and one, it's a very simple control scheme. You're just walking around slapping things. But every interaction causes the joke to happen. Or most do. There's jokes that happen around you in sort of the ambient space, but usually it's like when your action is what triggers the joke. And it's almost always unexpected, whether it's like you start going through this weird pipe system that seems to be knocking something off a shelf, or if you just happen to walk the wrong direction and you fall out of a window. And you don't die, but the character comments on it. To me, the fact that what you're doing in the game directly drives the joke that comes after it is what really makes it feel like a pure, great comedy to me.
Do you think there's a reason why there are so few, I guess, comedy games?
You know, sure. I think there's a couple reasons. One is that writing isn't always the most prioritized part of games. And for good reason. Writers aren't always at the start of it. You know, for certain games, the writing is more like putting the wrapping on a theme park ride, which you'll have laughs in while you're waiting in line with the monitor and someone talking about the Jurassic Park dinosaurs. You know, but that's not necessarily why people are going to ride the Jurassic Park ride. I also think that, and this is probably incorrect, so anyone hearing this that gets offended, I'm probably wrong. I think a lot of people who do get into games writing come from a little more of a purple role-playing game background. They want to write their epic. They want to write their political thriller. They want to write their cyberpunk dystopia story. They want to write their horror story. And all of those are absolutely legit. I think that it's growing, but I think that there's fewer people who are like, I just want to write the funniest game ever made.
Because I want to set up the excerpt that we have.
Yeah.
Doing the section about Columbine and how it affected your own high school experience. And I can't not laugh because it's like your journey is both like deeply funny and sad. And that's what I would love for you to kind of set up for the audience here as you're going into this thing is how do you, as a comedian and a writer and a storyteller, how do you balance these things when you go about writing something like this? You know,
and you'll hear it, but just to give you some context, I was in high school when Columbine happened. And for those of you that are old enough or know just from documentaries and whatnot, a lot of video games were blamed. And so kids who played a lot of video games, especially gothy kids, often were looked at a little more closely by school authorities. And that's basically what you need to know before you get into the story. That was probably the hardest time I had in high school. I was lucky in that I wasn't really bullied that much. There was no bully. There was more like people would mess with each other and there would be consequences of that. But it felt more like a two-way street than it did like a leave me alone. It felt more like I would kick the wasp hive and then run. But I think part of it is comedy works a little bit better for me when there's real emotions behind it and when there's real stakes to it. It's fun when there's stories about like me doing something stupid with a game and there being no consequences, but it's also like, there's something compelling to like the dangers that liking games presents. Like the fact that me and my friends liked games in high school for a moment almost threatened our ability to stay in high school, and not because we were addicted to the games, because we were being judged for them. In both building myself and making fun of myself, I also really wanted to be sure to emphasize that there's a vulnerability there, and there's an emotional importance to these games that go just past me embarrassing myself in front of crushes or something.
Very last question. 3 adjectives to describe the person who reads your book.
Successful, attractive.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. too, why it's so hard to make funny video games. Okay, so plenty of video games make me laugh, usually because they give me and my friends a chance to make total asses out of ourselves. Earlier this week, I played Peak with my friends and current Polygon Guides creators, Julia Lee and Johnny Yu. And as we ascended to the top of the mountain, mere feet from the marshmallows and campfire awaiting us on the summit, Julia missed a jump. She got her grip, she lost her grip, and plummeted hundreds of feet. But, and I'm happy to report this, before her body careened into the ground, she had just enough time to pull out her trumpet and let out the saddest little toot. And then, splat. This sort of shit, the shit I love, it happens all the time in games. And yet, exceedingly few games are what we'd call comedies. Like, in the way that we think of film and TV and books. Few games are written with lots of jokes. Fewer still are written with jokes that make you laugh. And fewer than that are written with jokes that make you laugh and don't make you groan as you hear said jokes for the 50th time. Tom Francis's games are the rare exception. Last year, he released Tactical Breach Wizards, which featured clever and even laugh-out-loud dialogue tied to a story so compelling, it got me to play a tactics game, a genre I frankly avoid. Earlier this year, Francis gave a speech at the Game Developers Conference on the tricks to writing funny games. Naturally, I invited him on to share those tricks and to talk about the state of funny games, which is the least funny way to frame funny games ever, except for the movie Funny Games. That's probably the least funny way. Anyway, too much movie talk this week, so let's get into it. Listeners, meet Tom Francis. You gave a talk at the Game Developers Conference earlier this year, and you shared what you called a few cheats to making a game funny. And I'd love to go through those with you. First, though, what do you mean when you say cheating in this sort of scenario?
Yeah, it's a series of things that seem to pay off more than was proportionate. So, they weren't that much effort, and they had a major effect. The problem is, if you call them, tricks or tips or something, the whole tone of the talk sounds really cheesy. I wanted to be a little bit self-deprecating there, and it does feel like cheating when you find something that works really well. And a lot of them are just, about avoiding work. They're I don't want to have to make every joke land, and so this is a way of getting you out of that.
Yeah, knowing that you were a journalist in a past life makes a lot of sense here to me, because a lot of these feel like sort of tools for setting up a good story, that they're replicable. And the first one that really stood out for me is this idea of a joke engine and how it operates. So I'm curious if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is very much something that I sort of, analyzed after the fact. It wasn't like a strategy I had going in. I very much stumbled into Tactical Breach Wizards as a concept. It was something that some friends and I at PC Gamer threw around once just as a sort of fun thought experiment of what if, the latest Call of Duty trailer we just watched, what if they were all wizards and it's still modern day and they just took it really seriously? And that just made us laugh, and not much more was thought about it. Years later, I started making an XCOM style game and didn't have a theme for it, and that theme sprung to mind and seemed to fit really well. And it wasn't until we actually started making it that I started to appreciate how much that concept just generates jokes. It's just Tactical Breach Wizards is sort of a joke in itself, but really it's kind of a genre of joke. Here's a formula of taking very sort of fanciful fantasy things and combining them with very serious tactical modern things, and usually that's funny. And so from there, there's loads of clashes like that you can come up with for characters and for settings and story events. But also just as you go, the more you mash these things together, the sillier it looks, and the more stuff you notice as you're making it. Oh, that's funny. Oh, and this is funny. And this is funny. And all I got to do is just point it out.
You later talk about this idea of character-based comedy, and it kind of naturally ties into this of having a strong story or a strong premise or a strong source of characters. Can you explain a little what you mean by character-based comedy?
Yeah, just the jokes seem to work a lot better when they stem from, who the character is as a person, and especially who they are in contrast to the other characters. So two of our main characters, Jen and Zan, Jen is a really sort of smart investigator who is really on the case, and Zan is a very experienced special forces guy, but he's very old, and his foresight ability that makes him effective in combat also takes a toll on his memory and his brain, and so he's scatterbrained. And so anytime the joke was about Zan kind of losing track of things and Jen being exasperated with him, that was funnier than a joke that doesn't reference those things. And it also has the nice effect of that line or that joke does double duty. So if people don't find it funny, then it's still a good character moment.
I want to talk about Tactical Breach Wizards specifically, because I get this idea of a joke engine of having a core idea that is inherently funny, and Tactical Breach Wizards is in itself that. And I get the idea of character-based comedy. But there's a weird thing about this game for me, and you pointed it out in your talk, which is ultimately it's a parody of Tom Clancy fiction, right? Of the Call of Duty scenarios of kind of the military-industrial complex. And I don't associate that with being, one, rich in characters to even riff off of, and two, the joke of those things has kind of been played over the course of the past 2 decades. And yet, this game has characters and it has a joke engine. So how did you find that kind of despite almost the source material that you were riffing off of?
Yeah, I think we mostly knew that the comedy wasn't going to come from the serious military stuff. It, like in itself, that side of things wasn't going to be funny. The funny part is taking the seriousness of that genre and putting it in a context that sort of defies that seriousness. Like, it's inherently silly to be wearing a wizard hat. Like, it's just stupid. And the more that we zero in on that clash, the funnier it is. I also found, maybe counterintuitively, that for me, it's only funny if they're taking it seriously. Like, the characters in our game do joke around and have fun with each other, but they're not sort of laughing at the fact that they're wearing wizard hats. Like, it's not funny to them. And at times, we take it very seriously and we try and present it like a modern military action thriller, because the more seriously you take it, the sillier it is and the funnier that juxtaposition is. Combining comedy with this genre that is both very serious and also has a lot of problems, in my opinion, wasn't as hard as maybe it sounds in theory, because if I was trying to write a game in this genre anyway, I would already want to have rich and interesting characters, which the genre doesn't normally have. I would already want to have likable characters, which the genre doesn't normally have. I would want to have a team that like each other and support each other and have like healthy relationships, which the genre doesn't normally have. And I would want a game with a message that isn't just like foreigners are evil and it's okay to mow them down in the millions. I would already want to do those things in a way that was almost not even a comedy concern. It was just something that I would want to do anyway. But all that said, that doesn't mean it's easy to actually do that, because you have to be in the genre enough to make the joke work. Like, it needs to look like one of these games. It needs to feel like it. You are going to be a special forces team. You are going to be doing breach and clear operations, which are sort of inherently problematic. Like, it's very hard to make the player feel like they are acting in self-defense if they breached into a room to start this situation. It was very important early on to make sure that you had a really good reason for what you're doing, and the people you're doing it to are powerful organizations. They are not a ragtag bunch of people who've been accused of crimes or terrorism. They are a private military corporation. They are a religious dictatorship. They are big, powerful entities, and you are the underdog, and you are trying to stop a war. So you have this very urgent reason to do it.
Going back to the cheats that you have for all of this, what is low-friction comedy to you?
Yeah, that's just jokes that don't feel like you had to take a detour to make them. I find that the more like setup you have to do just for the joke, the more cringy it is if that joke doesn't land. That joke has to really land at that point, for otherwise we're just like, oh God, really? That was all for this? And what I find is that if you're just making jokes along the way to something, if you're doing that, like the character-based comedy stuff, if that line already needs to exist to establish something about a character, and there's also a joke in it, then that joke is low friction, because if you don't find it funny, it doesn't clang to the floor. You don't find yourself stopping on it and thinking, oh God, really? Like, that was the joke? Because we're not here just for the joke. That was just a joke along the way. We were already going here. We already needed that line. I tried to make it funny, and for probably 60% of you, I failed. But those 60% are just getting a line that establishes character. And so doing that a lot just along the way helps the whole thing go smoothly and gets you past the biggest problem with comedy, really, which is that everyone has wildly different senses of humor, and listening to comedy that isn't funny, or, watching comedy or playing comedy that isn't funny is horrible. Whereas, like, if you watch an action film that isn't thrilling to you personally, it's not really, like, offensive necessarily. It's not off-putting to fail to be thrilled by an action scene. But it is off-putting to fail to laugh at a joke if it's just a joke, if it's just there to deliver a joke and that's the whole point of the scene. And you just get this cringe feeling of like, oh, God, really? So yeah, doing it in a kind of observational way, just along the way, gets you around that. And again, that wasn't a sort of conscious plan. It's just sort of naturally how I tend to approach this stuff. There's very little in Breach Wizards that was where a scene was written just to get to a joke or because the scene itself was funny. It's usually, this scene needs to be here for story reasons. And then as I write it, things about the situation or the characters strike me as funny. My job is just to point that out to you. Just have to figure out a way. How do I phrase this so you also notice this is funny? Like, it's already funny, so I don't have to do a lot of work. But if I don't mention it, most people aren't going to laugh at it. I need to find a way that just like nods at it just enough that you notice it and you see how silly it is in the way that I see it as silly.
Okay, so there was one last cheat, and this one surprised me because it seems antithetical to all of this. You recommend dialogue trees. And I don't associate dialogue trees with, like, comedy gold. But explain why they really worked for you.
I find these, like, an absolute gift for comedy writing, for all kinds of writing, but especially comedy. And I think that this was never a revelation to me. This is because one of the first funny games I ever played was Monkey Island 2, and that is dialogue trees through and through. Yeah, they just give you so much to play with. You get to write 3 jokes for a particular moment. I often find, like I was saying, when I'm coming to write a joke, it's because I've noticed something that I think is funny about the situation, and I want to point it out to you, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do that. And sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, you could go this angle, or you could go this other angle. And with dialogue trees, I can just write all 3. If I think they're all potentially funny to different people, I can write all 3, and whichever one makes you laugh, you'll click that one, and that's canon now. That's what happened. And the ones you didn't find funny, unlike if we have a scene in a comedy movie or something where like this is the joke, if that joke doesn't work for you, it clangs to the floor. If it's just one of 3 options, you don't have to pick it, and you don't pick it, then it did no damage. There was no kind of like cringe moment. You just kind of breeze past it. Unless you write like something really offensive, obviously, which is not hard to avoid in my experience. But yeah, it's all about just like the player filters what you've written to be what makes sense to them and what feels right to them. And so they get the best version of it for them. And that also applies to like even whether to joke or not. There's lots of places in Breach Wizards where like it's perfect time for a joke, but it's also quite a serious scene. And if I had to pick just one line, I'm going to lose in one way or another. Either I make a joke and some people are like, oh, that feels a bit tasteless given the context. Or maybe not tasteless, but actually just like, oh, that kind of deflates the drama of this. I was really into this and sympathizing with characters, and then I see they're just joking around, and now that's kind of spoiled the tone for me. But if I go the serious route, then the opportunity for a joke is lost. But with dialogue trees, you just put them both in. And then not only do people get to choose the one they want, but the people who do want to be serious because they're engaged and they're engrossed get to read the joke and laugh at it. And they have the fun of it as if the joke had been said, but they don't say it.
Your game, Tactical Breach Wizards, it was one of the best reviewed games on Steam in 2024. How much of that reaction do you think stemmed from the game's sense of humor?
That's a good question, because I was surprised that people like the rest of it. I was feeling pretty good about the comedy side of things because I found it funny and we're getting good feedback on that. And absolutely, some people click with it and absolutely love it. And most reviews praise it. There was one at launch, I can't remember who it was now, but a review that really liked the game that said, the only downside is like the humor just didn't work for me at all. And I'm like, wow, the humor didn't work for you at all and you still liked the game? That's a lot of humor in it. Like, if all of it's failing for you, that's amazed that it still kind of pulled through. And obviously, we put a ton of work into all the rest of the game. The comedy is kind of the easiest bit, really. We shouldn't be too surprised that it paid off. And then we did tests very thoroughly, so we knew people liked the game in general. But yeah, it wasn't a necessarily load-bearing element. But I think we saw a bit of what I was really hoping for, which is that people who aren't necessarily super into tactics games still were interested in the game, tried it out, liked it, and enjoyed the whole thing. I knew that this concept and the comedy of it, the Venn diagram overlap between people who are going to like that and people who are really into deep turn-based tactics games the overlap might be quite small. It's probably like 5%. There's no particular reason to assume that fans of one are going to be fans of the other. And so you really don't want your game to only appeal to people in that overlap. Ideally, you want it to appeal to just both full circles. If you like tactics games at all, then you'll like this. And if you like the humor in it, then you'll like that. And yeah, at times I did worry, is this a really stupid combination? Like, there's no reason to think there's an overlap between these audiences. And it could have been that all the serious tactics people didn't find it like serious and deep enough on a tactical level and didn't care about the story and the humor. And then all the people who would have liked the story and humor are put off by the turn-based tactics and like, I just don't like those games and, just can't get into it, whatever. So we really worked hard to make it very accessible, very forgiving and very playful, let you experiment, let you try things freely.
And there was an interesting that happened there for a moment when you were describing the genres and these two kind of pools of people, right? You were able to point to turn-based tactics, which is talk about genre within genre specificity, right? And then when you went to talk about humor games, there's like not a word for it. Like comedy exists in movies, TV, books, even music. You know, you can go and find comedy. You can find Weird Al. Why is comedy not a genre in video games?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's because video game genres, by necessity, have to talk about what you do in the game. And like video games, unlike all those other mediums, have to work. They have to function. They are like a machine. The player is going to push buttons and expect things to happen. And if something goes wrong with that, they can't progress in the game, and the game they don't get to see the rest of it. That central interaction is super important, and players need to know what that's going to be and can I even play this game? So we tend to have genres be about that. Like, what is it that I do? Or what kind of challenges am I going to be up against? Even if the main point of the game is comedy. Like Monkey Island, we don't call those comedy games, we call them adventure games. And it's a bit of a weird name because the word adventure doesn't really mean what we as gamers get from that genre name. If you tell me it's an adventure game, I know that it's going to be focused on, exploring a place. In the olden days, it would have always been point and click. These days, it's a bit broader, but ultimately, it's probably not going to be super challenging. It's probably not going to be like heavily combat based. It's going to be more about the story and the characters and stuff. So we've kind of had to name genres around how they work, because if you're wrong about that, if you're misled about that, then they just can't play the game.
So comedy becomes more the layer on top of whatever the game itself is.
Yeah. I think actually it's interesting to ask, like, are there pure comedy games? Because Breach Wizards isn't. It's, turn-based tactics with some comedy on top. Are there any that are pure comedy? And the only one that always springs to mind to me is Jazz Punk, where it's a first-person game. It's hard to sort of say what genre it is other than comedy, because pretty much everything that happens in it is in service of a joke. The very rules of the universe will twist to make a joke work. That one feels like a pure comedy game. Yeah. I don't know how many others there are.
Why is the aspiration for a game to make you cry and so very, very rarely for a game to make you laugh?
Yeah, I think that for a long time that was seen as like this measure of worthiness of the genre or the medium that we hadn't reached. And I think we're past that now. I think the number of people who have cried at a video game now is off the charts. There's no counting it. There's people are crying at video games constantly. And I also think that, I guess I haven't really encountered that skepticism that video games can make you laugh. I feel like video games frequently make people laugh, and often it's not intentional, or it's, people play Call of Duty or FIFA against each other and are cracking up at what's happening. And the game is not a comedy. It's not trying to make you laugh. It's just that things that happen in it can be naturally funny. And I think now we have a pretty strong genre of, I guess not a genre, but like an emerging pattern of games that are kind of built that way, where like they're built on the understanding that funny things will happen, but the game itself is not trying to make them funny, or the game isn't making jokes, and it's not sort of a comedy game. Like thinking of like Lethal Company and Content Warning. The genre is kind of horror, but it's just understood and expected that it'll be hilarious to see your friends get absolutely beasted by some horrible thing.
When you are playing games, and I guess I'm asking to put on your game critic hat here, if comedy in a game bombs, does it make the game feel worse?
Yeah, it's not always fatal, but yeah, it's the cringe factor, right? Like I've had it with games where it's been touted as a really funny thing, and I start playing it, and if the first couple jokes don't land for me, I'm just like, I think I'm done with this, actually. Like, because right? It's a personality match. It's almost like being friends or not friends with someone. It's like when you meet them and like the first three things they say to you are like, oh God, I don't like this guy. You're probably right that the rest of it is not going to be for you either. And yeah, it's hard to sit with jokes that aren't working, even if there is something else about the game that's good. And I think a lot of comedy that doesn't land for you is because it's in bad taste on some level, or it's just like, if that's funny to you and it's not funny to me, there is this distaste going on that's different to other things that might not land.
There's one thing that I wanted to talk about before we wrap up, now that you are on the developer side, which is the cost of making something funny. And by that, I mean like time and resources. When I was preparing for this call, I watched this Justin Roiland video on the potential for making funny games. And like, let's put aside basically everything about Justin Roiland for this point. But in this demonstration, he shows in one of his games a character doing a double jump tutorial. And that character like goes off and it does all sorts of other things. And the characters keep reacting to it. It's like, oh, you're not double jumping. You're going and killing all these sheep. You crazy person. How could you do that? And his point is, this is the power of games. Games can go out and you can do anything. You can react to what the player does in any way. Comedy is about surprising the audience, and look at all these surprises that you can create where the game is reacting to whatever wild thing the player does. And I'm watching this, and I'm not a game developer, but all I could think was, wow, that seems like a lot of work. Recording all of that different dialogue that most people might never see, or animation. But I don't know how this works. So I want to know from you, is there a hidden cost to making games funny and creating that sense of surprise? Or is it actually as simple as that?
No, I think in that case, you're right. I think that's a particular kind of humor that games can uniquely do that is really cool, that we don't really do in our games because it's a ton of work. Like, I think Stanley Parable is like the sort of go-to example for this. That is a game that is constantly reacting to your decisions, and all of the comedy comes from, you know, what if you keep not doing what the narrator tells you to do, and what if you defy the game in this way, and it's got an answer for it, and it's funny that it's got an answer for it because you don't expect it. You think, well, no one would make an answer to this. And obviously that game was very long in development, and also it is adding that aspect of humor to a game that otherwise would be walking down a series of corridors. Like, there is nothing else. That is the whole game, is the defying the narrator or experimenting with what the narrator will and won't let you do and how crazy it'll get. So the entire development work was making those eventualities and making it react in that way. If you wanted to also make like a really solid first-person shooter and to do that on top, that I'm sure that would be a nightmare. But yeah, our style of humor is we called it low friction for the audience. It's also kind of low friction for us because it doesn't require like architecting. We don't have to make a level about a joke. We don't have to sort of measure and track what the player does to deliver a punchline and make some assets and some voice lines and things just for this one eventuality. And that kind of deeply branching humor isn't really our thing. Ours comes partly from the art. Our artist, John Roberts, is the source of so many of my favorite like visual gags in Wizards and some written gags as well, where he just made something that was funny enough that all I had to do was write down what he'd made. In the intro to Breach Wizards, there is a tree ant wearing a ghillie suit. So like just a walking tree that's dressed in sniper camouflage. And that was entirely a John Roberts idea. He just made that. And then the dialogue that points it out is just, yeah, I have a character, notice that. And that's all I have to do for the joke, because that's just funny. And again, I think also because we're not solely a comedy game, we are a turn-based tactics game, and the fun of the gameplay is not going to come primarily from humor. It's going to come from actually like messing around with the mechanics, and hopefully you'll laugh at some things that happen as a result of it. But we've kind of got that as the main thing. We don't need to make sure that every moment of the game is funny. If you play through a level of Breach Wizards and nothing was funny, that isn't Breach Wizards failing. That was just a bit of turn-based tactics that you did. If I, as a writer, see something that's funny to me, I make a joke about it. If nothing does seem funny, then I don't make any jokes about it, and that's okay. Like, we can just put it in where it's easy. And we've always been very focused on efficiency in that way. Like, usually there's something that I want to achieve with a game, like something new or interesting, or that I think will pay off, and then I can't afford to take on anything else difficult. Everything else has to be done in the easiest possible way.
Act 3, the very same internal Nintendo studio that created Super Mario Odyssey, has released Donkey Kong Bonanza. With a 90 Metacritic score, it is one of the year's top-rated games. But forget scores. It's the words that matter, and the words, they are glowing. Many critics praise the game's destruction, which allows Donkey Kong to carve through most of the stages like a living subway board. At The Guardian, Matthew Castle eloquently sets up the stakes. As the latest game from the team responsible for the exceptional 3D Mario series, it is already begrudged by some Nintendo fans as a distraction. What could possibly be so exciting about a tie-wearing gorilla to justify making Bonanza head of another Super Mario Odyssey? Donkey Kong demolishes those concerns. Inverse, Hayes Madsen, gives an example of what that destructive potential looks like. One moment in Donkey Kong Bonanza felt like a revelation, like seeing the image of the Mona Lisa for the first time. I had simply punched my way straight down a mountain and landed on a Bonandium gem. Sprawled behind me was a lengthy platforming puzzle. My wanton destruction had let me punch my way out of doing an entire puzzle. And now the possibilities seemed endless. I can see how that might sound like hyperbole, but I've seen the Mona Lisa, and it's a mix of awe and intense desire to smash through every person raising an iPhone. So, in some way, I suppose it's a fair comparison. And one last quote from Ash Parrish at The Verge, writing about the game's joyful energy. Bonanza is a dad game, the same way The Last of Us is a dad game. Same world-trekking adventure with big, strong dude protecting a powerful little girl. But where The Last of Us makes you have big, sad feelings about all the people the game forces you to kill, Bonanza presents you with a slight alternative. What if you could use your powers to fuck shit up and not be a dick about it? DK smiles often. People are happy to see him. All that destruction is welcome because it's helping restore the world. I love that. As for me, I am probably playing it as you're listening to this episode. Hell, you probably are too, unless you're driving, in which case I've told you stop playing games while you're driving. In other news, the wildest industry story of the summer is Unknown Worlds, the developer of Subnautica 2, claiming publisher Krafton intentionally delayed the game's release to avoid a $250 million payout. Jason Schreier at Bloomberg and Nicole Carpenter at Aftermath have been reporting this one out seemingly each day, revealing new dramatic twists. In a complaint, Unknown Worlds founders stated, Krafton engaged in a month-long campaign to delay Subnautica 2's release. It pulled key marketing materials, refused to follow through with crucial partnerships, and reneged on long-standing commitments to handle important pre-launch tasks. Multiple Krafton employees themselves suggested that these moves were for the purpose of frustrating the earnout, despite the earnout agreement's prohibition on taking actions for that purpose. I mean, woof. We'll keep an eye on this one. We have seen plenty of publishers use a game's financial struggles to punish game makers, but if this complaint is to be believed, if it is true, this may be a publisher punishing developers for doing too well. What a time to love video games. And that is the news of the week. That is a wrap on funny games. Well, it's sort of a wrap. Everybody still gets an excerpt from Mike Drucker's new book, Good Game, No Rematch. It will start up right after this episode ends, so stick around. Next week, the history of Donkey Kong with, in my opinion, the greatest video game historian alive. That sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not. I am having Jeremy Parrish on my podcast, and that means so much because it is Retronauts that got me into video games, into video game journalism, into podcast, and this is a bit of a full circle moment for me. I can't wait for you to hear it. But for now, I begin my farewell. A reminder, as always, Post-Games supporters get the show and the newsletter early on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern. They get extra acts and bonus materials. This week, Patreon listeners got an extra conversation with Mike Drucker about what it is actually like to write at Nintendo. And each month, subscribers get a video in my ongoing series, Video Game Journalism 101. The second episode is now live. It's about ethics in games journalism, because why not? And no ads on anything. Subscribe to the Patreon at patreon.com/postgames. Subscribe to the newsletter for free at post.games and get all of the show notes and links to everything. Post Games logo by James Barham, theme by Mark Sparling, and a very special thank you to this week's guests, Mike Drucker and Tom Francis. And very last thing, if you like the show, consider sharing it with a friend or leaving a review. Still early days, still a huge help. I appreciate anything we can get. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.
The Great StarCraft Conspiracy. StarCraft almost got me expelled from school. I was a little over 15 when Columbine happened. It's hard to remember the feeling now that mass shootings have inexplicably become part of the fabric of our country. But when Columbine happened, schools across America basically stopped everything to reassess. One of the high schools in my county had almost a week of assemblies discussing how students felt about the incident. It was a massive tragedy that nowadays would take up maybe 2-3 hours tops on the news because life is a nightmare. It's not a good sign for a culture when someone says it happened again, and we're all pretty sure we know what it is. As with many schools across the country, my school was put under a strict no-tolerance policy without defining what that meant. No toy guns? Got it. But then you saw kids on the news getting hauled out of class because they drew a picture of a sci-fi ray gun. And even back then, we were like, I don't know about that. Rather than rooting out problems like untreated mental illness, ignored behavioral issues, and easy access to firearms, officials were throwing spaghetti at the wall to find something to blame. School administrators were desperate for a policy fix that would require no money or extra work. A few folks at my school concluded that their best bet was to shit on the students. With that zero-tolerance policy enacted, some school staff acted like they knew if they caught the next shooter, they'd be set for life. I'm not trying to be mean, but there was a type of adult at my school who was absolutely certain that in the face of a school shooting, they would have been able to stop any tragedy from happening through sheer pluck and machismo. That included one of my school's security guards. I forgot his name because he was a dick. Let's call him Mr. L. This specific dick was certain that our school must have someone planning something terrible. What that plan was, he seemed not to know. He demanded teachers send him any sad poems, pass on any drawings that looked a bit off. He'd stop people in the hall with weird hair or baggy Jinko jeans or whatever he thought was a sign of trouble. This dude wasn't just acting out of fear, he was acting out of a strong desire to be the school's hero. None of this was done carefully or remotely sympathetically. He had a huge grin on his face when he thought he got you, even though, ultimately, he got nobody and would stomp off. Unfortunately, I was kind of gothy and hung out with people who were really gothy. One of my closest friends, Phil, looked like a model right out of Vampire the Masquerade. The dude dressed like he was taking Satan out on a date to a Michelin star restaurant. We were a bunch of nerds who wore black and played games like StarCraft, Quake 3, and Unreal Tournament in the computer lab. And Columbine, for better or worse, flattened out everything goth into the trenchcoat mafia. To this particular security guard, every goth wearing dorky black clothes was a supervillain rather than a kid who liked Tim Burton and could have just used a few more hugs. He immediately started centering his suspicions around my little friend group. To be fair, a bunch of teens who mostly wore long trench coats in the South Florida heat was its own form of weirdness, but that had nothing to do with danger. Also, The Matrix had just come out a month before Columbine. That movie is all big coats and tight black outfits. Goth kids dressing like a pagan version of the Men in Black was not a new concept even then, and it definitely wasn't popularized by two evil fuckheads. But Mr. L didn't know any of this. I can't imagine the man seen a movie or any art that might cause him to empathize with someone. He began monitoring us, which we found out from teachers who felt uncomfortable when he asked them to feed him info. When you're 15 and a teacher says, "Be careful what you say, you're being watched," you feel absolutely terrified. And a little cool because that's the shit they say in spy movies, but mostly terrified. Soon, the security guard was finding the supposed proof he needed. His biggest discovery was our love of the strategy game StarCraft, which had only come out the year before and was immensely popular. According to his research, asking a teacher, StarCraft was a game in which different races tried to kill each other. The thing was, those were humans and alien races, as in different species with entirely different body structures. It's basically humans versus space insects versus star elves, but Mr. L jumped straight to helter-skelter. Sure, we were the strange ones. That security guard heard the word race, and he was off to the, races. He took each of us individually into small rooms and demanded we talk about our feelings on StarCraft. What race did we all play? How did we feel about the other races? Did we want to start a race war? He was an acrobat stretching to try to link a real-time strategy game with a desire for mass murder. No matter how much we all tried to individually explain to him what the game was, he thought he cleverly saw through our charade. It didn't matter that our school was mostly black, or that my group of friends was as diverse as the cover of a pamphlet for a college. Race war! In a way, this was a fitting way to cap off the 1990s scare over video game violence. Oh, don't get me wrong. People are still very worried about video game violence. Every time a Grand Theft Auto game comes out, some weirdo on the news says, "You kill hookers to get a high score," which is madness. Grand Theft Auto games don't even have a high score. In the 1990s, people such as infamous anti-fun lawyer Jack Thompson tried to work the refs in the government and get violent games banned. Doom and Mortal Kombat almost seem quaint now, but there were full-on congressional hearings about games. Night Trap was a crappy, hilariously bad CD-ROM horror game that had grainy clips of women in barely revealing clothes. Nobody on Earth played it, but adults on the news couldn't shut up about it. The fear that violent games poison the minds of children isn't any different than the fear that rap music, rock music, television, movies, vaudeville, ballroom dancing, and novels would poison the minds of children. But it was a fear that had been in the air for a while, especially as technology improved graphics and games began to look more realistic. It makes sense that when Columbine happened, a lot of talking heads pointed to video games as a likely contributing factor to the violence. There wasn't any real proof of this, of course, but it just seemed logical based on the public panic. Back at my school, there were near interrogations conducted over a couple weeks. One friend tried to show the guard what StarCraft was so he could wrap his mind around it. Nope, was not having it. It didn't matter what the game looked like. It only mattered that games like Quake and Street Fighter were convincing innocent children to hurt each other. Our protests to the contrary only made him more curious about what we were doing in class. It wasn't that he wanted to protect the school. That we understood even then. It was that we were being targeted for being dorks, a position we already weren't always in love with. A kid named Gary was found to have written a depressing poem about loneliness and worrying he'd die without anyone loving him. Emilio had drawn some Final Fantasy VII fan art of Cloud Strife with his giant sword, which was deemed threatening. Bird McSparrow, some of these names may be fake, had once sworn at a teacher during an argument. These were all seen as actual hard evidence and were brought up in our little talks. I've seen enough true crime shows now that I understand he wanted to play us off each other. But we were just some kids who brought Dreamcasts and Dance Dance Revolution pads to school. We weren't really angry at anybody. Our school treated us pretty well, and other students played video games with us all the time. Being into anime and PlayStation was not really a negative in my school. It turns out that the one time our high school group was bullied was when an adult on staff had a problem with us. Education. We spent days being pulled out of class and talked to together, alone, and at one point even with parents. My father was furious. He didn't believe the security guard. He didn't think I had it in me to hurt other students. But he was mad that he was off work that day and did not expect to need to put on pants. It was as rough a day for him as it was for me. For months, Mr. L kept trying to catch us out. He thought if he asked the same questions multiple times in multiple different settings, he'd get someone to spill. A few teachers believed him and began treating us like we were a threat. We learned this when Mr. L began inquiring about specific things we'd said in various classes. What did you mean when you told Ms. Clay that the Catcher in the Rye bored you to death? This motherfucking Dumbo thought he was Columbo. Fortunately, most teachers did not believe him. Unfortunately, Some teachers still decided to fuck with us over it, including one who accidentally stepped on my shoe and then jokingly knelt down to polish my sneakers while saying, "Please don't blow up the school." It was a thing. I know that's an insane joke to say to a student, but let me assure you that the story is absolutely true. Plus, that guy was also a very good English teacher who introduced us to authors like Zora Neale Hurston and Nella Larson. And while I know it's a very grim bit, it did make us nervously laugh in the moment. Sadly, Mr. L kind of won. He didn't get in trouble for harassing kids. There was no confrontation, no calling out. Instead, some students in my goth group just began to skip school. These were smart people who were already disaffected by abuse and other issues at home. And while I was only 15, a few of the friends in my group were older and had the legal ability to just drop out. So some did. A few, including Phil, Emilio, and Bird, simply entered the military. I believe one or two of them eventually saw some combat in the Iraq War. My friends felt they weren't really welcome in the school, so they left. And I don't know what happened to them after that. Early on in the war, I'd check lists of casualties to find their names. After about a year of this, I couldn't bring myself to do it anymore. There weren't easy ways to find them either. Nobody I knew from then was on MySpace. Facebook was still a young, exclusive app that only let in a couple colleges at a time. I didn't even have the names or numbers of their families. We mostly just hung out at school. Hell, some of them still aren't on social media, or at least not easy for me to locate. I hope they're happy. I hope they're safe. I hope they read this and they think I'm being histrionic while remembering that I sucked at Soul Calibur. As for my friend Phil, I only know a little of what happened after he left for the military. Phil and I were in our own minigroup. He may have looked like the IT guy for a Rammstein concert, but Lord did I look up to that man. He was my rock. When I was rejected by a girl, I talked to him. When his mom and dad were divorcing, he talked to me. I believed wholly in Phil and would have walked into hell for him to have that Michelin star dinner with Satan. I definitely had some form of crush on him that I did not put together until later in life. Phil joined the military and, from what I heard, became a sniper, which is ironic considering the reason he was pushed out of school. I only have old second and third hand accounts, but it sounds like he might have had some personal troubles after that. I hope that's not true, but if it is, I hope he's got what he needs. Last we ever communicated was about 7 years ago when he wrote me a cryptic email. Not cryptic like a puzzle that could be solved, but cryptic in that it was a small congratulations on a semi-viral video game tweet after not talking to me at all since high school. I don't remember what the tweet was, but I do remember writing a long, rambling email asking how he was doing and explaining how I was doing. There was never a response, which is very mysterious and very like him. If you're wondering why I don't just Google Phil, it's because his real first name is very common in all English-speaking countries, and his last name is also a very common noun in all English-speaking countries. The search results I get are only helpful if the truth was that he aged quicker than me and was a dentist in New Zealand. Of course, what I suffered in high school isn't anywhere near the suffering of people who've experienced the actual danger and terror that happen in school shootings. The two aren't even in the same fucking universe of fear. I'm lucky that I was in high school at a time when school shootings weren't treated as if they were uncontrollable natural disasters like tornadoes and earthquakes. But I'll never stop thinking that a security guard with an ego made some of my favorite people leave. They were nerds who had found a school that treated them all right, and they were punished for enjoying it. The games they played with other students suddenly also made them a supposed threat to other students. Protoss, Zerg, Terran. It didn't matter what race you played in StarCraft, evil was afoot. Also, now that I think about it, Mr. L never picked up on the fact that we also played a lot of Diablo, which is so demonic and violent that it makes StarCraft look like Paw Patrol. That man should have his photo just slightly off-center in the Dumb Fuck Hall of Fame. This story doesn't end badly for me. I continued to be lucky. I continued to be okay. I did well in school, which provided me with some protection from teachers when Mr. L got overly judicious or wanted to randomly pull me out of class. Plus, those teachers had begun to become annoyed with what everyone knew was bullshit. Meanwhile, I entered high school engineering and language competitions and took home prizes. I liked school to begin with, but I sure as hell had to keep being the model student until Mr. L was satisfied he'd driven off enough kids. Ultimately, I was the valedictorian of my high school. I gave a speech that actually got some applause breaks, but it felt hollow. What mattered was that some of my best friends weren't there to see it, even though they could have been. Phil and his common noun last name wasn't there. Gary wasn't there. Emilio wasn't there. Bird McSparrow wasn't there either. I'm still too self-satisfied with that name, by the way. I wish I could have some meager sympathy for Mr. L and his righteous quest. Columbine and later 9/11 would change society and break our brains in the process. Some people were looking for heroes. Others wanted to become heroes. A few wanted to be seen as heroes without doing any real hero work. Mr. L was in that last category. He saw an opening to get his name in the paper, and, more importantly, he saw us dressed as his newborn idea of bad kids. So, he wasted our time, filled us with paranoia, and ultimately broke us apart. Not because we liked video games, but because liking video games was seen as suspicious. I still enjoyed high school, but I can't imagine just how incredible my time would have been if those guys weren't forced to leave by the constant harassment. I lost some of my best friends, and I never saw most of them again. I miss them all. I hate that security guard. And StarCraft is still about aliens.